Hello and welcome to the Ecology Summer Review. This is going to cover for my class the second quarter or the second half of first semester. Start with this. What we got here? So P42 is all about niches, and so this is the ecological role of a species in an ecosystem. It's defined by both its biotic or living factors, such as what it interacts with, as well as the abiotic factors, such as temperature, precipitation, to aquatic species, the pH, the soil density, etc. There's two types of niches. There's the fundamental niche versus the realized niche. The fundamental niche is the niche with no competition. So this is where it could live. So basically like the abiotic factors it can survive in. Whereas the realized niche is where it survives in competition with other species. Now, that leads us to two other concepts. There's niche partitioning versus competitive exclusion. And on the right here, we have a picture that summarizes niche partitioning. The different species of lizards can live in different parts of the trees. And so since they have slightly different niches, that allows them to coexist. So that's niche partitioning. The competitive exclusion principle says if two species have the exact same niche, one will go extinct. Oxygen. So one of the abiotic factors that can determine a species' role in an ecosystem is oxygen. We have three different kinds. We have our obligate anaerobes, meaning they cannot have oxygen. That's poor phrasing. It really is to say they cannot survive in oxygen. So they need no oxygen. Then we have our obligate aerobes, which need oxygen. And then our facultative anaerobes can live with or without oxygen. So they primarily prefer no oxygen, but they can survive in the presence of oxygen. All right, we have our different types of nutrition. So as you can see here, I have some pictures of some of them. So to give you a second to try and figure out which one's which. Okay, our first one, the bamboo, is an autotroph. So autotrophs use an external energy source and take inorganic molecules and turn them into organic molecules. Then we have our mixotrophs. Our mixotrophs are both heterotrophic and autotrophic. And then just like there was obligate and facultative, we have the same concept here. So some of them are obligate, which means they have to do heterotrophic and autotrophic, and some are facultative, which means they can be, typically they're autotrophs that can be heterotrophic, but it does change occasionally. Then we have our heterotrophs. So our heterotrophs are an internal energy source from feeding, and they're using organic molecules. And then we have different categories of those. So we have our lion, which is a consumer, an internal digester. This is both our predators and our herbivores. Then we have our detritivores, like the roundworm, which eats dead and decaying material, but it still is digesting internally. So these are both consumers and heterotrophs. And then we have our saprotrophs, which are external digesters. And so they secrete out digestive enzymes and then pull in just the nutrients. Archaea are the weird ones. They can be a variety of these. They can be heterotrophs, they can be autotrophs, they can be mixotrophs. They're a very diverse group of single-celled organisms. They can have many different types of nutrition. Teeth. Wow, that is a lot bigger than I meant it to be. What kind of teeth do we think these are? What do we think this human ancestor ate? If you said this is an herbivorous ancestor, you'd be correct. Notice the very flat teeth all throughout the mouth, indicating that it is primarily eating plants because it's doing a lot of grinding. And so this would be a relative similar to like Paranthropus robustus, the nutcracker, Or it's too many teeth, though, to be Homo floresiensis, right? So that one would have a tinier mouth. All right, adaptations. What do we have there? If you said porcupine, you're pretty close. This is a prehensile-tailed porcupine, so a relative of the North American porcupine. And so teeth, the type of teeth an animal has affects its diet. And then herbivores versus plants. So herbivores can have special mouth parts like leafcutter ants for eating plants. They can also have resistance to the toxins that the plants create. So like monarch butterflies and milkweed. And then plants, on the other hand, can obviously have toxins and spines to defend against herbivores too. So it's that arms race. Predators, same thing, can have adaptations to allow them to catch prey, and prey can have adaptations to defend themselves. So our prehensile-tailed porcupine has spikes, and you can tell it's got claws for climbing. Prehensile tail means it can grab onto things, so they can climb and get away that way. They can have behavioral chemical adaptations. So, for example, snakes, they have toxins to help minimize or take it down their prey. And then teeth, claws, etc. Tiger stripes are another adaptation. Behavioral adaptations, wolves hunting in groups, orcas hunting in groups, etc. Plants have adaptations for light. There's the 4 different kinds. They can grow tall. They can be small shrubs that take in far red light instead of the normal red and blue light. Or they can climb on other plants. We have the 2 different kinds. We have the lianas that start in the ground and climb up, or the strangler epiphytes, or epiphytes in general, which start on a plant and typically work their way down. Yeah. All right, C42. What do we have here? Coral reef, or an ecosystem. And so, when we talk about ecosystems, we're talking about the flow of energy and matter. The flow of energy and matter. Ecosystems on this planet are open, which means they can exchange energy and matter. Although, depending on the scale, you think about it as you can sometimes consider them closed. So, like island ecosystems, if they're only exchanging energy and not matter, we typically think of it as more of a closed ecosystem. Ecosystems include all abiotic and biotic factors, so it's typically, we call it like the habitat and the community, where the community is all living organisms in an area. So how do most ecosystems get sunlight? So most of them get it. Most of them get energy as sunlight, excuse me. The exception being our deep ocean ones, which get it through chemical energy. So that energy is going to flow through food webs. We have an example of a food web on the bottom there. So you can see the energy flows. You point the arrows up it. And then heat or decomposers get energy from dead things, and then they recycle the carbon, but the energy is lost, and heat is lost at every trophic level. So there's less and less energy, thus lowering the amount of organisms you'll have at the top of the food web because they don't have as much energy for them. We also need to know the carbon cycle. So remember, CO2 or carbon dioxide in the air is probably the most important thing to do for your carbon cycle. Then we have photosynthesis, puts it into plants, and then cell respiration puts it back into the atmosphere. So that's from both plants, consumers, and from saprotrophs. All 3 of those are going to release it. How do we get it to the saprotrophs? Well, that's death. And then partial decomposition leads to fossil fuels. Remember, our coal comes from peat found in wetlands where it's anaerobic and acidic, whereas our oil and gas, natural gas, form in the ocean with marine animals or plants that were not fully decomposed. So they are both very high in hydrocarbons, high energy density, but they are formed in very different manners. So coal is formed from wetlands, oil and gas is formed from marine organisms. We have this curve. What is this called? The Keeling curve, that's correct. And so the Keeling curve represents the seasonal fluctuations that happen throughout the year, as well as the overall increase in carbon dioxide since the Industrial Revolution. All right, D42. What is this? If you said the Hinaway Reserve, you would be correct. Nicely done. And so this leads us to stability of ecosystems. So ecosystems are stable over long periods of time. So the Amazon rainforest has been around for a very long time. But they require some things to be stable. They require four things. They require a constant supply of energy. They require recycling of nutrients, genetic diversity, so the different populations need to have a lot of variation for them to remain stable. And they need stable climate variables remaining within a certain range of tolerance to allow them to remain stable. Keystone species are another way to improve stability of an ecosystem. If you remember, there's different types. There's ecosystem engineers, mutualists, and then predators. Now, what are some dangers to stability? The answer is humans. Deforestation in the Amazon is causing it to be less stable. Resource harvesting, so over harvesting of areas for resources. Agriculture, clearing land for agriculture, lowers the stability of an area. And it also leads to eutrophication of aquatic ecosystems. Remember, eutrophication is the leaching of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus into aquatic ecosystems, causing an algal bloom. This algal bloom then causes they're short-lived and they die off, the algae dies off, and then as the decomposers use up all the oxygen, it causes an anoxic or a dead zone. Pollutants, the pollutants can vary. We have our plastics and our microplastics. Mercury and pesticides are kind of the main three pollutants that endanger the stability of ecosystems. And yeah, okay, that was it. All right, HL only needs to know this. This is a volcano, but obviously it's a volcano. Why do we care about it though? Because it represents succession. Specifically, it represents primary succession. So primary succession is from bare rock, and it starts with a lichen. And it's typically, there are three main ways it can happen. Volcanoes, sand dunes, and glaciers receding are the main three. Secondary succession starts on soil, and it's typically things like fire, flooding, etc. So some of our other natural disasters that are a little less disastery. Cyclical succession. Cyclical succession has no climax community, and this is where it keeps cycling through. And this is typically found in areas like wetlands or deserts that have like a really wet and dry season. So there are certain ones that aren't as dry all year round. They have these weird, different dramatic changing seasons. And so arrested succession is another one that causes there to be no climax community. And this is where it's prevented by humans through two methods, livestock grazing and then drainage of wetlands. And that's lichen in the top corner. Okay, D43. I found this picture when I Googled the title and I thought it was very appropriate. This is climate change. And so the climate change unit covers the greenhouse gas effect. This is the main thing. So short wavelength radiation enters the atmosphere, as you can see in the picture. It heats the surface of the Earth releases long wavelength radiation, which is then trapped by the greenhouse gases and radiated back outwards, heating up our atmosphere. And so this leads to a bunch of effects that have a name. These are our positive feedback cycles. And so the first one is carbon dioxide from the deep ocean. So as the oceans heat, they cannot hold on to as much carbon dioxide in the deep ocean, therefore more is released, which causes there to be more heating, which causes more to be released, which causes more heating. The snow and ice. So as the temperature warms up, we melt the snow and ice. And as the snow and ice melts, there's less reflective surfaces, so it heats up even more, which then melts more snow and ice, which then means there's even more heat trapped. and so there's less reflecting, and so more heating up. Then we have two different ones. We have more decomposition of peat in wetlands and organic matter under the permafrost. So both of these are going to release carbon dioxide and methane. And so you're getting all of this CO2 and methane from increased decomposition of these two different sources. And then there's more droughts, which leads to more forest fires, which leads to more CO2, which leads to more heating. So all of these are increasing greenhouse gases, which are increasing temperatures, which is causing these to happen more, hence why they're called positive feedback cycles. Obviously, positive in this case does not mean good, it just means increasing. All right, so what are the effects on living organisms? That's the greatest picture ever. All right, boreal forests. So the boreal forest is drying up, and then it's burning, and it's reaching a tipping point. And so as it dries out, it causes it to be more susceptible to flames, and then it lights even more. The landfast ice is melting, and this is affecting our emperor penguins in Antarctica, the South Pole, where they are losing their breeding grounds because the ice is breaking off, and then they cannot access their breeding grounds. Walruses are being affected by the sea ice melting in the North Pole, so the other side of the globe. Similar thing, that where they live on the sea ice, and as that melts, they don't have as much habitat. Changes in upwelling, this is very prevalent along the coast of California. And so you have the nutrients from the deep ocean being brought to the surface, creating a very rich nutrient environment along the coastline here and cold water. That's why Northern California beaches are so cold. But as the surface of the ocean heats, that prevents the rising of that deep water and it disrupts the currents and the upwelling current, leading to less nutrients, causing there to be die-offs in the coastal ecosystems. We have our poleward shifts, so things are moving northward in North America, so they're moving towards the North Pole. And these would be like our pine trees in North America. And then we have our upslope shifts, which is like the montane birds in New Guinea, which are being driven up mountains. As it heats up, the climate is getting hotter and hotter, so they're moving up mountains to try and avoid it. And then coral reefs are also collapsing. How do we fix this issue? Carbon sequestration is pulling in more carbon. Remember, there are 3 methods to do it. How many can you think of? There's afforestation, which is the planting of new forests. There's forest regeneration, which is what you see in the picture here. And for forest regeneration and for afforestation, you have to decide whether you're going to do native or non-native species, because there's pros and cons to each, depending on where you live. And then you also can restore peat-forming wetlands. So this is taking the native ecosystem of a wetland and restoring it so that it can start sequestering carbon again. HO only, what bird is this? This is, of course, the tawny owl. So the tawny owl is being affected by climate change, and this is an example of evolution due to climate change. So it has two forms. It has the brown form and the gray form, and the brown form is becoming more common due to climate change. And so it is, that way it doesn't stand out because there's no more snow. Then the last concept is phenology. So we have a picture of a reindeer. That's correct. And so phenology is the study of the timing of biological events. This is relevant to climate change because it's affected by photoperiod and temperature. Well, the photoperiod is not changing, that's the length of the day, but temperature is changing due to climate change, which leads to a disruption of the synchrony of these events. And so the first example you need to know is the reindeer and the Arctic mouse ear chickweed. Remember, the plant is going to be mainly controlled by the temperature in this case, and so it is blooming earlier. The ground is thawing earlier, therefore it can start blooming earlier. And so the reindeer, though, are migrating primarily based off of photoperiod. And so what happens is they are like, oh, food, but by the time they get there, it's already mature, and so there's less nutrients in it. Then we have the caterpillar and the great tit bird, which lives in Europe, and so Insects are often regulated by temperature. They develop faster when there's a higher temperature, which is the same as in the spruce bark beetle. And so then the food for the birds is not there anymore because they have already matured and turned into butterflies. They just blossom so fast. Spruce bark beetles, remember, are the things, or we actually had like the mountain pine beetle and different bark beetles, but they are the ones that are destroying all of the trees in California and leading to increased forest fires. Because they can reproduce faster, they can spread more in a single generation and destroy more trees, make them more drought susceptible, etc. All right, that leads us to A42. And we have this, which shows the diversity of all the living things. All right, so biodiversity, remember there are three kinds. There's ecosystem diversity, which is like the diversity of the different biomes around the world and of the different, um, and then species diversity is the diversity within like an ecosystem, so all of the different species you can find there. And finally, there's genetic diversity, which is the diversity within a species. So the higher these are, the more stable ecosystems are. We do know that based off of our evidence, there are more species alive than ever before through speciation, but we are currently undergoing the sixth mass extinction, our human-caused anthropogenic mass extinction. And so the main evidence for this is the International Science and Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services report. So it's that really big report, and then other scientific studies that show us populations declining around the world. So why are they going bye-bye? The main cause is human population growth. And so human population growth causes us to need more things, which leads to increased hunting, urbanization, deforestation, overexploitation, pollution, and then spread of invasive species and diseases are caused by global transport. So as we move things around the globe with planes and ships, we are spreading invasive species, diseases, and pollution more. So all of these are causing the current biodiversity crisis and the mass extinction events. The ones we need to know, right, are the pterocarp forest and then a local one, which is kind of like a choose your own pick. You could choose the riparian ecosystem, the chaparral ecosystem, which is one of the most endangered biomes in the entire world. That is the one found throughout Southern California up into the valley along the hill lines with the coastal sage scrub, and that's very endangered. The whole biome is endangered because it's near the coast and people want to live near the coast, so they chopped it all down. So how can we protect diversity? We can protect it off-site or ex situ through zoos, botanical gardens, seed banks, etc. Or we can protect it on-site with nature reserves or other protected areas. There's the EDGE program, which is one method of deciding what species should be conserved, and it stands for evolutionarily distinct, globally endangered, and our main example is the red panda.